evening. My name is Khalid. My team members are Raphael, Bob McConnell in the distance, and Tom Speller. We will present to you today the design and management of MIT 100K competition using system dynamics. Our agenda for today will first begin by going over the competition background and project description. We will then highlight a problem with the management of the 100K competition. Then we'll cover our system dynamics approach, show simulation results, and we'll conclude by some recommendations. First, I will begin by going over the competition background and project description. And this slide takes okay. The 100K is fully run by MIT students. The first prize is 100K. It's actually a little bit more than that, but they still brand it as 100K. It creates a dynamic exchange between entrepreneurs and sponsors looking for the next big idea. It is open to all MIT students and outside entrepreneurs with the condition that one MIT full-time student should be on the team. Since it started in 1989, it helped create over 130 companies. It generated more than 2,500 jobs, and it received $770 million venture capital funding. A brief history about the competition. It started in 1989, and it was initially branded as 10K competition. It was rebranded in 96 to 50K, and in 2006 it was again rebranded to 100K. And its first year, they had 64 competing teams, 4 sponsors, and mainly 1 contest. In 2009, they had 260 competing teams, 13 sponsors, and 3 contests. I just would like to bring your attention that the spike you see there is due to the 15th anniversary of the competition. So what the organizers envision is growth in number of competing teams and prize purse. So one main problem that the organizers face is how to keep the competition going in terms of competing teams and most importantly in terms of prize money. Given the limited number of volunteers that run the competition every year and the limited time they have to run the competition, we developed a detailed system design model. That's a system dynamics model. Sorry, I'm used to my major. System dynamics model. This is a simplified view showing portions of our model that cover the sponsor system dynamics model and the staffing and productivity. Our main focus is growth, and we're showing here some input and output variables that we will cover in detail. We interviewed one of the 100K associate directors, and we found out that they have very high staff turnover between years. They have poor knowledge transfer, and they mentioned that this year they plan to develop an internal wiki after the final event, but they said it might be unlikely, might not happen due to the end of the year and people leaving. Typically, they filter the number of, or they control the number of volunteers coming in every year. They limit it to 50. And they have about 15 people, or what we call experienced staff, from the previous year continuing on organizing the role for another year. This year, they decided not to put a cap on the number of volunteers, and they accepted all 75 volunteers that showed up. They still had an average number of 15 mentors. Raphael now will go over the system dynamics approach.
As Khalid said, we're going to use project management principles and methods in order to help this particular organization to keep growing. And we have seen along in the course different ways to help organization, help project to improve process. We select system dynamic approach for several reasons. The main one is the stakeholder in this organization. They made decisions over the time, year after year. So we identify after the interview with the stakeholder and also the data collection that some of the decisions could have some side effect. So because this is policy resistant in the organization, we think one of the factors more important is the high turnover of staffing, which causes repeated learning curve effect. So basically, we build a model and in order to test our hypothesis. One dynamic hypothesis that we formulate is as the number of volunteers increase, we finish the project early, so we have time to implement a knowledge management strategy, like for example, building a wiki. If we build a wiki in several years, we reduce of time because we decrease the time to gain experience. So basically, we have more time for other improvements, like for example, develop marketing strategy and recruit more sponsors, and finally, meet our goal, which is increase the funding. So we build the model, and we use a lineage model, for example, the staff part, and also the number of tasks. Also, we develop funding and sponsor part of the model. The more challenge we face building the model is that this is a temporary project. Every year, we run the same project again. So we have every year the same 100 tasks. So in order to build a 10-year horizon, we develop a whole strain. We can see here, 100 tasks every year is filled into the model. We can see here in the work to do. Every year, we put 100 tasks. And when the work is done, so we reset the stock work to do. Also with the staffing, similar thing, because we recruit volunteer every year. And we develop the same post train. And now, Bob will explain the part of the model who focus on sponsor and funding.
All right, thanks, Rafael. As mentioned earlier, a major portion of managing the 100K is devoted to fundraising. If you don't have sponsors, funding, awards, and seed money, you don't really have a competition. So we modified the system dynamics model to incorporate the effects of the sponsorship and funding, and likewise the effects of seeking additional sponsorship on an additional workload. So remain focused on the main purpose of the presentation, and also due to the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the components of the sponsorship model in detail, unless possibly maybe at the end time permits. But essentially, we've added stocks and flows representing sponsors, funding from contributions, operations spending, and awards allocations. Changes in number of sponsors and their contributions are affected by the perceived quality of the competition. And we've modeled what we consider the perceived quality based on the amount of excess time available after all the tasks have been completed within a year. And this would indicate extra effort available for seeking additional funding. Alternatively, the scheduled tasks cannot be completed within a year. The perceived quality then on the amount of work left unfinished. And so the effects of perceived quality will either increase or reduce the number of sponsors and their contributions. And additional workload is then added to the annual tasks for efforts associated with seeking additional funding, such as when you begin to allocate more awards or operations spending more than the amount of funding actually coming in. And on the slide shown in front of you, we then calibrated all the input variables from our sponsorship model to best match historic data as closely as possible. Similar to the growth chart you saw at the beginning of the presentation, historic data was based on data gathered from both discussions with committee members as well as research of available public data. And from here, we then ran simulations to better understand the effects of certain parameters, which Tom will now discuss in greater detail.
Okay, so now that we've calibrated the model, we can go over our results. First thing we tested is how does increasing the number of initial volunteers from 50 to 75 affect the project. And what we found is that this actually increases the amount of effort being put in and the amount of work actually being done as a result of higher rework generation. But at the same time, the rate of work being accomplished is also significantly higher, and it reduces the overall time by 4 weeks. But this is based on the assumption that time to gain experience is actually the same. And since by adding more people, you actually change the ratio of mentors to volunteers, this may not be true. So we did a sensitivity analysis where we increased time to gain experience by 25%. And in this scenario, we only reduce the project by 1 week. And if you increase it to 50%, you actually wind up being 2 weeks late. It's important for the project organizers to watch the progress of their new volunteers very early in the project to see whether this is happening or not. The next thing we tested is how does the wiki actually affect the project? And it's a little different because we don't think it's the same kind of before and after effect. It's something that accumulates over time. And so in the model we implemented this by the effect actually gradually reducing time to gain experience over time, which here reduces the length of the project over time. And these are the actual numbers from the graph for year 10, where the wiki eventually, under the base case with 50 volunteers, reduces the time by 5 weeks. And if it's combined with 75 volunteers, it's a potential gain of about 10 weeks. And since we're interested in growth, we tie this into our sponsorship portion of the model, and we see that after the wiki is introduced, there is gradual growth in sponsorship as more time becomes available to focus on new tasks related to sponsorship. So now we have our conclusions and recommendations. Just to reiterate what we've done, we talked about how the number of inexperienced staff can affect time to completion, how that affects what we call event quality, and in turn affects growth. And we also talked about how time to gain experience similarly affects time to completion and event quality and growth. So our final recommendations are to accept up to 75 volunteers every year, with the caveat that there is that risk of potentially increasing time to gain experience. So that's something they want to keep track of. And if it starts slowing down, then they want to implement a new policy. If they are able to keep it the same as previous years, then they can go ahead and implement the wiki within the scope of the project instead of waiting till the following summer when everyone is going to be gone anyway. And then as more time becomes available, they can allocate more resources to fundraising and marketing and other tasks that will increase the project. Finally, thanks to Jim, our mentor, and a couple of people from the